In the second example of the plot structure, we want to look at Luke 7. And so, again, we're familiar with the passage, but as we think about this passage and as I summarize it, think again about these categories of setting, rising tension, climax, turning point, resolution, and following action. So again, you got the Jesus being introduced or invited to the Pharisee's house. The woman, though, enters in to this story. And Simon has a problem with what this woman is doing to Jesus. He even calls into question Jesus' identity, and then Jesus responds with a question, a story about two debtors. And Simon answers the story correctly, and then he turns to the woman and begins to indict Simon with, "You didn't do this, but she did it. You didn't do this, but she did it. You didn't do this, but she did it." And then he turns to the woman and says that her sins are forgiven, for she loved much. But he who's forgiven little loves little. And then those who were at the table said, "Who is this who forgives sins?" And he said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." So as we begin to look at this story and break it down into the different elements, um, we first start with again, verse 36. One of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him, and he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at table. Now, again, this is just the setting at this point. Now, we don't have all the characters yet because the woman hasn't come in, but it's just setting it up. We don't know. This story could have gone in any number of directions at this point. Simon could have been a legitimate seeker, and he really wanted to get to know Jesus. So we don't know where this story is going to go, but this is just setting it up that here's Jesus now in a prominent Pharisee's house. There should be a level of suspicion, though, because do know who the Pharisees were and that they kind of had a thing against Jesus. But Nicodemus, on the other hand, seemed to be a genuine seeker. But we don't know about Simon. So then, though, I would say the tension gets started when this woman comes into the story and or comes into the scene. And we don't even know her name. All we know that she was a sinner, and she begins to worship Jesus extravagantly. And imagine if you were there in the house, what you would be thinking at this point. You would be probably thinking, what in the world is this woman doing in here? She wasn't invited. This is awkward. Um, Jesus is kind of letting this happen. What's going on? And so there would be this sense of tension even rising up within your soul if you were there in the room where it happened. And so, but then it even gets a little bit more intense where Simon then says, you know, uh, I, who are you that you would even be allowing her? Certainly you're not a prophet. And then Jesus tells the story about the two debtors. And so this tension continues to rise in this room where not only with the woman who's coming in, but now with Simon questioning who Jesus is, Jesus responding to Simon's thoughts. Note, Simon didn't say that loud, but Jesus responds to his thoughts and tells him this story about two kinds of debtors. And then I would say we reach the crisis moment in the story where then Simon gets the right answer about the parable, but then Simon's heart couldn't be more wrong. In that, then turning towards a woman, he said to Simon, Jesus said to him, "Do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet. She's wet my feet with her tears," so on and so forth. And then down in verse 47, "Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But he who is forgiven little loves little." And he said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." What Jesus has just done at that moment is he has indicted Simon, and Simon is now the one in the parable that is forgiven very little and responds with very little gratitude. Jesus puts him in his place in his own home, but at the same time, what he does is he exalts this woman right there in Simon's home, right in front of everybody. and he pronounces her forgiveness, and that she is the one in the story that's been forgiven much and has the most love and gratitude for the one that forgave the debt. And so at that moment, I would say probably in verse 47 is that place where there's the turning point. If you're, again, sitting there, you're reading this story for the first time, you probably should be wondering, is this woman going to be the hero of the story? Certainly not. I mean, she's a sinner. We don't even know her name. Certainly not. She's certainly not going to be the one that, I mean, the Pharisees are the Bible guys. They're the religious people. They have it all together. But Jesus flips the script and he pronounces forgiveness to the woman. So this is the turning point, the resolution in the story. And then the following action, or the rest of the story, the end of the story, is then those at the table began to say to themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? And I said in the previous video that I think Luke is inviting us in to ask that very same question. Who is this? What kind of person is this that forgives sins? Only God can forgive sins. And then, though, he said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. And so what I want to mention, though, as we think about the narratives and narrative structure, what the author is doing in this structure is he's focusing our eyes. Again, this all is under this concept of how is the author emphasizing certain things? What is most important to the author is what we're thinking about as far as structure is concerned. And so, where is the author focusing our eyes? And usually, what the author is doing is he's focusing our eyes in the most tense part of the story. And think of a radar on your phone or your iPad or on the news where you're watching the radar of a storm rolling in. That red part is the hottest part of the storm. And that's kind of the part that really gets most of your attention. And so the same thing with this, the hottest part of these stories is where the crisis is and then the resolution. And so the author is turning our eyes there, turning our attention to communicate to us, this is the most prominent part of this story. This is what I want you to focus on. And so as we think about narratives, we want to think in terms of this plot structure, beginning, middle, and end, the tension, how the tension is resolved, and then the following action.